Looking at the map right now, what we're seeing is not just another winter storm rolling through. This is a large-scale pattern shift, and it's the kind of setup that has the potential to affect a massive portion of North America for an extended period. This is a significant cold air intrusion combined with active storm development zones, and it's going to impact everything from temperatures to precipitation to travel across multiple regions. So let's break down exactly what's happening and what this means for different parts of the country. The dominant feature in this pattern is a deep trough positioned over the central and eastern portions of the United States. When meteorologists talk about a trough, we're talking about a dip in the jet stream that allows cold air to plunge southward. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. Arctic air is surging south from Canada, and it's penetrating unusually far into the United States. This isn't a typical cold front that brushes through and moves on. This is a structural pattern where the atmosphere has essentially opened the door for Arctic air to flood southward and then stay in place for a while. On the other side of this setup, there's likely a ridge over parts of the western United States or the Pacific. A ridge is the opposite of a trough. It's a bulge in the jet stream that typically brings warmer, more stable conditions. So what we have is a classic amplified pattern, a ridge in the west and a trough in the east. This configuration is what's driving everything we're about to discuss. The cold air, the storm development, the snow potential, it all stems from this upper air setup. Now let's talk about temperature, because temperature is the foundation of everything else. When we look at the temperature map, what we're seeing is a strong cold anomaly spreading southward across a huge area. Let's break this down region by region, because the impacts are going to vary depending on where you are. Starting in the central United States, this is where the core of the cold air is positioned. Temperatures are running well below seasonal averages. We're not talking about a degree or two below normal, we're talking about a significant departure from what's typical for this time of year. Areas that normally see temperatures in the 30s or 40s could be seeing temperatures in the teens or even single digits. This is the kind of cold that makes everything harder. Heating systems are working overtime. Pipes are at risk of freezing, and if you have to be outside, you need to dress appropriately because this is serious cold. In the Midwest, we're looking at the heart of the cold air mass. This is where temperatures are going to be sustained at freezing or well below for an extended period. It's not just one cold night, this is multiple days of deep cold. And when you combine those low temperatures with wind, which we'll talk about in a moment, wind chill becomes a major concern. The actual air temperature might be 10 degrees, but if the wind is blowing at 20 or 30 miles per hour, it's going to feel like it's well below zero. That's dangerous. Frostbite can occur on exposed skin in just minutes under those conditions. Moving to the northeast, cold air is entrenched there as well. This is a favorable setup for snow if moisture arrives, which we'll get to. But even without snow, the cold itself is significant. We're talking about temperatures that are going to stay below freezing for days, with overnight lows potentially dropping into the single digits or below zero in some areas. If you live in the northeast, you know what winter is supposed to feel like, but this is going to be on the more intense end of the spectrum. Now here's where it gets interesting. The southeast is going to feel this cold air as well, and that's unusual. Arctic air doesn't always make it this far south with this much intensity, but in this pattern, it is. We're talking about cold air pushing into parts of the deep south that don't typically see this kind of cold. There's a risk of freeze impacts in areas that aren't always prepared for it. If you're in the deep south and you have outdoor plants, pipes that aren't insulated, or livestock, you need to take precautions. This isn't a typical southern winter day. This is legitimate freezing cold. Florida is going to see a sharp temperature drop compared to normal as well. If temperatures approach freezing in northern Florida, there could be impacts. We're talking about potential effects on wildlife, especially cold-sensitive species like iguanas that can become immobilized in cold temperatures. Agriculture could also be at risk if temperatures drop low enough in citrus-growing regions. This is the kind of cold that Florida doesn't see often, and when it does, it gets attention. Out in the western United States, conditions are likely to be more stable compared to the central and eastern parts of the country. Depending on where that ridge is positioned, the west could remain milder or at least seasonable. So if you're on the west coast, you're not dealing with the same extreme cold that the rest of the country is experiencing. But that doesn't mean you're unaffected. The pattern that's causing the trough in the east is related to the ridge in the west. And sometimes those ridges can bring their own issues, like dry conditions or offshore winds. Now let's talk about precipitation, because cold air alone is only part of the story. When we look at the precipitation layer on the map, we're seeing a band of active precipitation aligned with the frontal boundary. This is where the cold air to the north is meeting milder air to the south, and that collision is creating lift in the atmosphere. Lift is what causes precipitation to develop, and depending on which side of that boundary you're on, you're going to see very different types of precipitation. In the Midwest and Great Lakes region, we're looking at a high probability of moderate to heavy snow. The cold air is firmly in place, and any moisture that moves into this region is going to fall as snow. But there's an added factor here, and that's the Great Lakes. When cold air moves over the relatively warmer waters of the lakes, it picks up moisture, and that moisture gets dumped as snow on the downwind side. This is lake effect snow, and it can be intense. If you're in western Michigan, northern Indiana, western New York, or any of the other typical lake effect zones, you could see significant additional snowfall beyond what the main system brings. Lake effect snow is notoriously difficult to predict because it sets up in narrow bands, but when you're in one of those bands, snow can pile up quickly. The Central Plains also have snow potential, especially if moisture overlaps with the peak of the cold air. This is an area where blowing snow could become a major issue. If winds pick up, and in a pattern like this they often do, you could have snow that's already on the ground being lifted and blown around, reducing visibility to near zero. That makes travel extremely dangerous, even if new snowfall isn't heavy. The Northeast Corridor is another area to watch closely for snow. Whether this region sees significant snow depends on storm track. If a low-pressure system develops and tracks favorably along the coast, the Northeast could see a major snowfall event. Coastal storms in the winter can be highly impactful, bringing heavy snow, strong winds, and coastal flooding. The temperature is certainly cold enough for snow. The question is whether the moisture and the storm track line up. That's something we'll need to monitor closely as this pattern evolves. In the southern states, we're looking at cold rain or a wintry mix in transition zones. This is where temperatures are marginal, hovering right around freezing. You could see rain, sleet, or freezing rain depending on the exact temperature profile. Freezing rain is especially dangerous because it creates a coating of ice on everything it touches. Roads become skating rinks, power lines get weighed down with ice and can snap. Even a light glaze of ice can cause major problems, so if you're in a transition zone, this is something to take very seriously. Now let's talk about pressure and wind, because this is a critical part of the story. The pattern suggests strong, high-pressure building south from Canada. High pressure is what's pushing that cold air southward. At the same time, low pressure is developing along the baroclinic boundary, which is that zone where the cold air meets the warmer air. When you have strong high pressure on one side and developing low pressure on the other, you get a tight pressure gradient. And a tight pressure gradient means gusty winds. Wind is going to enhance several of the hazards we've already talked about. First, there's wind chill. Cold temperatures become dangerous temperatures when you add wind. The wind strips heat away from your body much faster than still air does. So even if the actual air temperature is 10 degrees, if the wind is blowing hard, it could feel like it's -10 or -15. That's dangerous cold, and it requires taking precautions. Second, wind creates blowing snow. In areas where snow is on the ground or falling, strong winds will lift that snow and blow it around. This reduces visibility dramatically. You could be driving on a road that looks clear one moment, and the next moment you can't see 50 feet in front of you because of blowing snow. This is a major travel hazard, especially in open areas like the Plains states, where there aren't many trees or buildings to block the wind. Third, wind increases the risk of power outages. When you combine ice accumulation on power lines with strong winds, lines can snap. And when temperatures are this cold, losing power isn't just an inconvenience, it's a safety issue. People need heat, and if the power goes out, they need to have a backup plan. Let's talk about timing and evolution, because this isn't a quick-hitting event. When we look at the timeline, what we're seeing is an initial cold surge that establishes across the central United States, and then it holds. This pattern doesn't look short-lived. The cold appears sustained rather than brief. That means we're not talking about one cold day followed by a warm-up. We're talking about multiple days, potentially a week or more, of below normal temperatures. On top of that, secondary storm systems may ride along that temperature boundary. So it's not just one storm and done. There could be repeated opportunities for winter weather as disturbances move along that frontal zone. Each one of those disturbances could bring additional snow, additional ice, or additional wind. This is a pattern that has persistence, and that's important to understand. You need to be prepared not just for one event, but for an extended period of winter weather. Now let's talk about impacts, because that's what really matters. If you're in a snow-affected region, travel disruptions are likely. Roads are going to be slick, visibility could be reduced, and even after snow stops falling, blowing snow can continue to create hazardous conditions. If you don't have to travel, don't. If you do have to travel, make sure your vehicle is prepared, you have a full tank of gas, and you have emergency supplies with you. Wind chills in the Midwest and northern plains are going to be dangerous. We're talking about values that could reach well below zero. If you have to be outside, limit your time. Dress in layers, cover all exposed skin, and watch for signs of frostbite, which include numbness and a waxy appearance to the skin. Heating demand is going to increase nationwide. If you haven't already, make sure your heating system is working properly. If you use alternative heating sources like space heaters or fireplaces, make sure you're using them safely. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a risk when people use heating sources improperly. Freeze warnings are possible in southern states. If you're in an area that doesn't typically deal with hard freezes, take precautions. Bring outdoor plants inside or cover them. Insulate exposed pipes. Make sure livestock have shelter and access to water that won't freeze. If snow totals accumulate significantly, we could see school closures, business closures, and general disruptions to normal life. Roads can ice over, especially overnight when temperatures drop. And even after the main event, secondary freezing can create black ice on roads that look clear. The bottom line is this: what we're looking at is a classic amplified winter pattern characterized by a strong Arctic air mass expansion, an active storm track along temperature gradients, widespread below average temperatures, and multiple snow opportunities. This is not a minor cold snap. This is a structural pattern shift, and it's capable of producing prolonged winter impacts across large portions of the United States. The pattern has persistence, the cold is significant, and the potential for winter weather is elevated not just for one day, but for an extended period. If you're in an affected area, now is the time to prepare. Make sure you have supplies, check your heating, have a plan, and stay informed, because this pattern is going to stick around for a while.